Welcome, everybody. My name is Ron. I'm an alcoholic. A couple quick announcements before Lily takes over. Please take your seats. We're going to start. We now have hot tea to go along with Tim's ham sliders, so thank Tim when you see him. That was his idea. Make sure everybody's included. We will have a meeting Christmas Eve here. This is 2023 is the next time a Saturday is going to fall on New Year's Eve and Christmas Eve. So Christmas Eve we got a pretty good little festive thing going on here. But our we have a big party going on New Year's Eve. We have 3 speakers coming in from multiple states. We got Roy T coming in. He's originally got sober in Bombay, India. He is so funny. We got Chris S from Connecticut, really Bloomfield, Bernardsville, New Jersey, and Colorado. He's coming in, and Robbie W from Wildwood, New Jersey will be coming in. There'll be plenty of food and fun. We'll probably run from 7:30 p.m. to about 10 p.m. and then I think we're going to go move the party to the Lambertville party dance for the midnight. So that sounds kind of fun. There is an art sale going on right now outside in the hallway. It benefits charities. So if you want to give some money to charity, it's always a great thing to do. And I think that's about all I have to announce for now. Miss Lily will take over. Enjoy yourselves. Please make sure you help us drink all that coffee and eat that food.
Hello, everyone. Happy holidays. Welcome to the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And my name is Lily. I'm an alcoholic. This is a 1-hour speaker meeting that meets here every Saturday at St. Paul's Lutheran Church and at 8:30 p.m. in Doylestown. And the purpose of the group is to provide a consistent message of hope and recovery through God reliance and service to others through the practice and teaching of the 12 steps. We record all speakers so that others may benefit from their message of recovery. But if you wish not to be recorded, just simply ask. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. The group would like to welcome everyone, especially newcomers. Is there anyone new or from out of town that would like to introduce themselves with their first name only? No one's new? Yes?
Hi, I'm Danny.
Hi, Danny. Welcome.
I'm Dave. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, welcome, Dave. Anybody else? Yes?
Hi, I'm Taylor.
Hi, Taylor. Welcome. Okay. All right. The Conscious Contact Speaker Group encourages sponsorship. So would anyone with working knowledge of the 12 steps and willing to sponsor, please raise your hands. All right, if you don't have a sponsor, please speak to one of these folks afterwards. That's the lifeline of the group. Are there any announcements for the good of AA? Ron's already made several, but are there any other ones? Okay. So we have meeting lists and big books on easy terms. Please see me or any home group member after the meeting. If you can't afford a big book, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group will give you one for free. Anyone willing to make donations for the purchase of these books and CDs, etc., and can't afford them, but please put donations in the jar in the back buffet table over there. If you would like a CD of any speaker, past or present, please see Ron after the meeting. They're available for free, and there's a wide assortment of them. And I've asked Bill to come up and read the AA preamble.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bill. I'm an alcoholic. The AA preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. And I've asked Zach to come up and read the AA 12 Steps of Recovery.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Zach, and I'm an alcoholic. And these are the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Step 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. Step 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Step 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And Step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs.
There's an additional announcement. Bob D. from Las Vegas, Nevada will be coming for a workshop on Saturday, the 28th, and it's an all-day here at St. Paul's Lutheran Church. So please come. It's from 10 to 4 p.m., again on the 28th of January. We do have a seventh tradition. Every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. So at this time, we'll pass around the baskets. We don't have any dues or fees, but we do have expenses. All of the coffee, all of the food, cream and donuts, CDs, etc. So there's absolutely no smoking on church property anywhere. That's a big deal. Please go across the street or somewhere else, but not on church property. And this would be a good time to silence all cell phones and limit movement during the meeting to avoid distractions. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce a speaker. He's a very good friend of the Conscious Contact Speaker Group and comes to us from South Orange, New Jersey. Please welcome John V.
Hi everyone, my name is John. I'm an alcoholic. And my home group is the Big Book Study Group of South Orange. And I am one of the lucky ones in AA to actually have a permanent job. And I have the privilege to serve Area 44, which is northern New Jersey, as the Associate Archivist. And what that allows me to do is to come out and meet all of you and tell you about AA history, which is, such a privilege and a pleasure to be able to do. And by the way, on the back table, I put some northern New Jersey bookmarks. And these are collectible items, so I'm going to tell you, you may want to grab them and stash them because you may never see one of these again. And it's a great little keepsake. You put it right into your big book, and you'll always have it. So it never fails to amaze and humble me when I look back on the drama that was to unfold into AA. At the right place and the right moment in time, certain people had to come together playing their assigned roles so that we could have this wonderful fellowship that we have today. And there are no coincidences. The famous psychiatrist Carl Jung coined the term synchronicity. I know the Police named an album Synchronicity. But the gist of synchronicity is that at a given time and place, seemingly unrelated events are taking place that have, in fact, a common purpose. And if you look at the history of AA, it is one big story of of synchronicity. And there are no coincidences. And I was talking to someone before the meeting, and it was so interesting. We could have, at a given point, we could have turned left, and the whole thing may have been completely different. But I think as we look back and we see, you can see the hand of providence all the time guiding this thing. And I believe today it is still guiding us and sometimes saving us from ourselves. And the history of Alcoholics Anonymous is very, very colorful. You know, there are so many great stories and there's so many legendary stories. And not always do you hear the history accurately, by the way. You know, there's a lot of myths and legends in Alcoholics Anonymous. But recently, at our area convention, the History and Archives Committee of Northern New Jersey put together a talk about the 4 founding moments in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm going to try to talk about that tonight. The 4 founding moments come from a book, by the way, that was written by a gentleman by the name of Ernie Kurtz, and the name of the book was Not God. Some people here might be familiar with it. It's probably the preeminent history book that there is. Ernie was working on his doctoral thesis, and he wrote about the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it became a wonderful, wonderful book. If you ever get a chance to buy it, it is the premier AA history book. But in the book, he talks about the 4 founding moments of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the first founding moment was the story of this guy named Rowland Hazard. And if you're a fan of the big book and you're familiar with chapter 2, there is a solution. There's a story, I think it begins on page 25, and it starts off, and there was this certain American businessman. I'll just take a quick look and see. Certain American businessman had ability, good sense, and high character. So how many of you are familiar with this story? So this is the story.
I'm sorry.
No problem. This is the story of a New England industrialist by the name of Rowland Hazard. The family was based in Rhode Island. And Rowland and his family were real blue bloods, high society. Rowland was a graduate of Yale University. And his family owned the series of companies that later came together to form the Allied Signal Company, which was a Fortune 500 company. I think Honeywell ended up buying it, and where they are now, I don't know. So Rowland has all this great education, and his destiny seems assured. So he's groomed to be a director in the Allied Signal Company. And Rowland had one big problem. Rowland was one of us. Rowland was the type that as soon as he began to drink, he couldn't control the amount he took. So the way the story goes is they have Rowland seeing all the best American doctors and clergy and everybody, and nobody can help Rowland. So finally they send Rowland off to see Dr. Carl Jung. And by the way, sometimes if you hear this story from Joe and Charlie, they like to say, well, he went to see Freud, but Freud was too busy, and then he went to see Adler. So that's kind of mythology. It sounds good. Somebody mentioned before the meeting, and it's very, very true. You know, had Rowland gone to Freud, we might be talking about our affections for our mothers and stuff like that. But Carl Jung was very much based in spirituality. So the story goes that Rowland goes over to Europe to meet with Carl Jung, and that he spends a year getting psychoanalyzed. Well, it was really 90 days, but you know, we alcoholics, we stretch it just a little. And by the way, the story of Rowland Hazard, I like to call it a parable. And the reason I call it a parable, so if you look at the definition of a parable, it's a short allegorical story that's meant to teach some great moral principle or truth. And in the big book, there are many, many parables. It doesn't matter that sometimes they depart from what we will call the full truth at times. Do they do what they're designed to do, which is to reveal to us some great truth or principle? So Roland's over there getting psychoanalyzed for 90 days. I'll stick to the story. It's a year. He spends a year with Carl Jung. And the book tells us that we kind of, we uncovered all the hidden springs and inner workings of my mind. That relapse was unthinkable. So he leaves the good doctor's care. And there's another funny story that says, well, he got as far as Paris. He was heading back home. He got as far as Paris, and someone asked him the wrong question. They said, Roland, would you like a drink? And he said, yes, of course, I would like a drink. See, I got self-knowledge now. I'm going to be able to control how much I drink. It doesn't work that way. Once we put any alcohol whatsoever into our body, we trigger that phenomenon of craving, and the whole thing changes. So Roland lets the genie out of the bottle, and he's drunk. And the way the story goes, he returns to the doctor and says, Doctor, what happened? And it's kind of interesting. In the book, they talk about, more than anything, he wanted to regain self-control. He had control over his life in so many areas, but not when it came to alcohol. So here's Roland. He wants to go back to drinking normally. Why can't I control it? And Carl Jung says to Roland, for a while I thought you were one of those guys that, therapy was going to help. But now I want to tell you that there is very, very little chance for your recovery, and unless you lock yourself up or hire a bodyguard, you're either going to die or go insane. So Roland says, well, it seemed like the gates of hell closed with a clang. And he says to Carl Jung, are there no exceptions? And Carl Jung says, well, Roland, there are some exceptions. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had these vital spiritual experiences. And he says, they're phenomenon to me. I've never seen it. I don't understand it. But they have been known to happen. So here's a little tidbit that most people don't know. Carl Jung was very, very familiar with the work of William James. And he had met William James and spent a couple of nights with William James here in America. So William James wrote this book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. And William James talked about it in The Varieties of Religious Experience. There were 2 or 3 stories of drunks that had these sudden spiritual experiences. And they were struck sober. So Carl Jung is saying, look, they have been known to work. I haven't seen one, and I've never worked with anyone of your type that has ever recovered. So he says, the only thing I could suggest to you is that you place yourself in the religious atmosphere of your choosing and hope that the lightning will strike. So Roland ended up joining the Oxford Group. The Oxford Group was a bunch of people in the mid-20s, late 20s, early 30s that had come together in this non-denominational spiritual movement. They called themselves the First Century Christian Fellowship. And Roland got involved with them and took their practical program of action, which I'll share with you in a little bit, and he sobered up. In 1932, 33 and 34, Roland was very, very active with the Oxford Group. 34, he's up in Vermont in the summertime, a place called, Roland had a summer home in Shaftesbury, Vermont. And he's up there with a couple of the other Oxford groupers, and they hear about Ebby Thatcher. Ebby was Bill Wilson's boyhood school friend. Ebby also came from a family like Roland. Very blue blood, American Revolutionary period. The Thatcher family kind of ran Albany, New York. The uncle had been the mayor of Albany. At the time, in 1934, Ebby's brother was the mayor of Albany. And Ebby was having trouble with his drinking. And the family said, look, we want you to go to the summer home in Vermont. We'll pay your expenses. Just don't come back to Albany. So Ebby's up there in the summer, and he has a couple of brushes with the law. And the first one was Ebby's driving drunk, and he crashes his car into this house in Manchester. And it goes up the street and kind of crashes into the kitchen. And Ebby gets out of the car, and he says to the lady of the house, could I trouble you for a cup of coffee? The house is collapsing around the car, and could I have a cup of coffee? So not long after that, Ebby's up there in Vermont, and he's like, my life's falling apart. What am I going to do? I got to get a plan. I know, I'll paint the house. So Ebby gets some ladders and paint. He starts painting the house. Paints about 20 square feet, sits down, starts to look at it. This is great. Let me have a drink. And some pigeons come along and start crapping on the new paint job. And Ebby gets a shotgun and comes out blasting away. And this is, by the way, in Manchester, Vermont. So the neighbors think World War III is starting, and they call the police. And they come and take Ebby, and they lock Ebby up. So now Ebby's going to appear before the magistrate in Bennington. And they don't fool around, back then. You get arrested a couple of times for public drunkenness and other insanity, and they commit you. So Ebby's about to get committed to the Vermont State Insane Asylum in Brattleboro. As I said, Roland was up there with two other Oxford groupers, Seaber Graves and Shep Cornell. And the judge that is going to hear the case, so here now we're talking synchronicity, okay? The judge that is going to hear the case is Seaber's father. So they hear about Ebby, and Roland goes to the trial, the court, and they convince the judge to release Ebby in their custody. I say, we have a program of action that may work for Ebby. So the judge says, okay, I'm going to let you take Ebby. Just get him out of Vermont. See, Ebby's real estate's shrinking, He can't go to New York now. He can't go to Vermont. But Roland takes Ebby and brings him down to New York City and puts him in the Calvary Mission. Calvary Church in New York City is on Madison Avenue and I think 21st Street. Calvary Mission was a couple of blocks away. And Ebby sobers up. This leads to the second founding moment. So I'll come back and kind of close the loop on the first founding moment. And in all these founding moments, I'm going to tell you there's a message. And that's why it's important to know some of the AA history. Because if you know AA history, you know how it worked. If you know how it worked, you know how it still works. If we just do the same things that we did back then. So the second founding moment, now Ebby's in New York, and Ebby sobers up. And one of the Oxford group tenets was, if you want to keep it, you have to pass it on. So Ebby's down in New York, summer of 1934, fall of 1934, and he hears about his good friend, Bill Wilson. Bill and Ebby had gone to high school together. And the story of how Ebby kind of hooks up with Bill is also in the big book. I think it's page 8. Take a look. I took my bookmark out. Near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. So there's Bill's story. Just to quickly give you the history of Bill Wilson. So Bill comes to New York. He considers himself a stockbroker. He's really not. He's a stock analyst. Remember how I said we alcoholics kind of inflate our capabilities? And Bill came from an alcoholic family, and one of the things about Bill Wilson, he was that type A personality, very hard driver. A lot of us can identify with the same way. And Bill talks about in his story, I drank to dream even bigger dreams. And, you know, it's crazy. We drink and we think we're doing ourselves some good, right? Oh, I have a plan now. Here's my life. Here's my job. I got it all figured out. And, of course, you know, it's crazy. But Bill uses alcohol because he thinks it gives him something that he doesn't have. And Bill's life and his illness progresses. So he goes in for his first treatment, you know, when he can't stop drinking, and Dr. Silkworth tells him about his theory on alcoholism, that there's an allergy involved. And Bill goes through successive detoxes, you know, separated by months at a time. But it says, okay, so here I am in November of 1934, in that bleak day. So Bill's been detoxed 3 times already. He stays sober for 3 or 4 months at a time, but then something gets him started drinking again. And it was Veterans Day. He went to play golf in Staten Island. He stopped at a club along with this guy. He says, no, I'm not drinking. And then the bartender comes over with 2 free drinks, and he pounds it down. He's drinking for 3 weeks straight now, drunk as can be. And Ebby calls him and says, I'd like to come over. So Ebby shows up, and there he is, fresh-skinned and glowing. You know, he talks about it in the big book. And try to picture this. So Bill's drunk for 3 weeks. He's 40 pounds underweight. It talks about it in the big book. I could just picture Bill like in a dirty T-shirt and a bathrobe and slippers, and he comes to the door, and there's Ebby looking like Ron, fresh-skinned and glowing. Ebby, come on in. So Bill's got this plan. We're going to drink. We're going to relive old memories and all this. It's great. And Bill pours Ebby a drink, and what Bill was drinking back then was gin and pineapple juice. I don't think I ever drank gin and pineapple juice. But that's what they're drinking. So he pushes the drink across the table, and Ebby says, no, Bill, I'm not drinking. And Bill is curious. Well, what's up with that, Ebby? It says in the book, simply and smilingly, Ebby says, I've got religion. And Bill probably goes, not the answer Bill was expecting to hear. And Bill says to Ebby, well, what brand of religion do you have, Ebby? And Ebby goes on to tell Bill, well, you know, Bill, I think you would call it the religion of common sense. And Ebby goes and tells Bill the story of what had happened. I was up in Vermont. I was in trouble. I was about to get locked up. And these guys came and got me off the hook. They brought me down to New York, and they gave me this simple program of action. Like it says in the big book, and the result was self-evident. It worked. Bill's looking at Ebby, and he's saying, Ebby's as bad a drinker as I am, but yet here he is, he's sober, and look at me. I'm a disaster. Bill's very much the competitive type. You know, he's looking at Ebby and saying, how can you sober up and I can't? And Ebby shares with Bill the 4 practical spiritual activities of the Oxford Group. And what the Oxford Group had going on, and this was not a program for drunks, this was a program for anyone who wanted to try to improve their life and find themselves. And the 4 tenets were surrender, sharing, restitution, and guidance. And they worked around what Robert Speer had called the principles of Jesus. which came from the Sermon on the Mount. And it was absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. If you go out to Akron or Cleveland today, they're still talking about the absolutes. This is what we took from the Oxford Group. You don't hear it here in New York or in the New York area. We're more a little on the psychological side sometimes. But the program out in Akron and Cleveland is very, very much grounded in spirituality. And a lot of it is still carrying that original message. So Ebby goes through this with Bill. And Bill doesn't like the idea, so we're talking about first century Christianity, and Bill doesn't like the idea, well, I got to kind of have this personal Savior. If you read the big book, suddenly it says, and you're following along in the story, and then at the top of page, I guess it's 9 or 10, it says, to Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man. Have you ever asked yourself why suddenly in the book that comes out? Because that's what Ebby and Bill were talking about. A lot of what's in the big book got edited, so some of Bill's story loses some of the particular details. But Bill says, I didn't like these theories. My mind snapped shut. He said I could accept the idea of a czar of the heavens and a creative intelligence and all that, but when you talked about a God that was personal to me, and he's talking about Jesus, he says, my mind snapped shut to those kind of ideas. And here's the thing that Ebby said to Bill that was just so important. So they were arguing back and forth what God is, what God isn't. And Ebby says, well, Bill, why are we arguing? Why don't you just choose your own concept of God? And Bill says, that idea kind of hit me hard. It melted this icy intellectual mountain whose shadow I had stood and shivered for many years. And Bill says, I stood in the sunlight at last. We talk about the white light experience that Bill had in the town's hospital, but I'm going to tell you, Bill's spiritual experience began right there at that kitchen table. And because look what he says, it melted the icy intellectual mountain. So when this is psychic change beginning to occur, very, very powerful stuff taking place there. So here's the part that's not in the big book, but I'll give you some of the history, what happened. So Ebby's smart, he knows when to leave. They talk for a couple of hours, but there comes a point where, okay, I'm going to let you kind of digest what I've just given you. So Bill's very interested in this. He has to be, because here's Ebby sober and Bill's a disaster. So Ebby leaves, and what happens is this thing begins to work on Bill. Okay, Bill's thinking about it. He's still drinking. He's still drunk. But the idea of Ebby being sober is really powerful. And Bill starts to think, if I had cancer, right, and the doctor told me I could be cured by doing this, what would I do? I would do this, right? I mean, if you have a fatal disease and you have a death sentence, and somebody says, well, here's the one thing you can do. Well, if you want to live, what are you going to do? You're going to do it. And Bill says, if I had to go out into the middle of the street and start doing the hallelujahs with all these people, if it meant that I could live, then that's what I would do. We alcoholics, we're a riot. You're drowning, right? You're in the middle of the lake, going down for the third time. We come along, AA comes along, right, rowing by, and we throw you this life preserver. And it says, let's say, for example, it says religion on it. We look at it, we throw it back. Are you kidding me? Drown, fool. What, you don't get that it's a fatal disease, right? So that's the problem. But here's what really happens. When you're going down for the third time, and the next time down, the water's going in your lungs, that's when surrender usually happens. And then you're ready to do anything. I love the 12 and 12. We're ready to do anything that will lift this merciless obsession. So Bill decides, I'm going to make an investigation of this Oxford group thing. So the following weekend, he goes to look for Ebby at the Calvary Mission. So Bill heads over there. He takes the subway from Brooklyn. He gets off the wrong stop, and he goes down 23rd Street from the west side over to the east side. And 23rd Street has bars all over the place. So Bill's kind of bar hopping on his way to the Calvary Mission. He picks up this fisherman called Alex the Thin. He says, come on, we're going to go meet some fishers of men. But they get to the Calvary Mission, and Bill's drunk. And Bill, when he's drunk, he's loud, he's boisterous, he's obnoxious. Bill used to get into fights all the time. So they almost don't let him in, but Ebby shows up, and they give Ebby gets him a plate of beans and a cup of coffee. They settle him down. And what they did at the rescue missions back then is, so you'd sit out in the wooden pews, and people would get up and testify. That's what they called it. It was sharing. Okay, the Oxford group, I told you, had sharing as one of the tenets. There were two types of sharing. Sharing for witness, which would be somebody standing up at the podium and talking, and then sharing for confession, which became our fourth and fifth step. But Bill talked about it in his autobiography, so I listened to like 5, 10, or 15 people talk, and that's what they did. But then at the end of the sharing, they did what was called the altar call. Okay, who wants to come up and surrender their life? Right, and the drunks would start to shuffle up. So they did the altar call, and Ebby's looking the other way, and then suddenly Bill's heading up to the altar, and like Ebby's trying to grab at him and pull him back. But Bill goes up and surrenders, gets down on his knees at the rail of the altar in the Calvary Mission. And of course, Bill gets up and he has to speak. Right? So they're not inviting him to speak. Bill's drunk. And I want to speak. And if Ebby can get sober, I can get sober. But what Bill said was basically, look, he had surrendered. And the funny thing that day when Bill got home, something had occurred that had almost never occurred before. Bill still had money in his pocket. How many of you were like me that if you went out, I never went home with money in my pocket. If I had money in my pocket, I just had to keep going. But Bill woke up and there was money in his pocket. What's today's date? So Bill goes into the town's hospital on December 11th, 1934. So today's the 10th. Oh, synchronicity. I don't know. Here we are talking about Bill. So he goes through the regiment again, and what they did in the town's hospital, they gave you what was called the belladonna treatment. They called it puke and purge. Right, he says it in the book, mild hydrotherapy. Well, it's not like he's in the pool with hydrotherapy. They're hooking up hoses to all his orifices, and they're giving him belladonna, and they're flushing him out. And the belladonna was a very, very strong, I'll call it a psychotropic. I mean, it's funny. So they're detoxing you from alcohol with something similar to LSD, I guess. I mean, certainly tripping. Ebby comes to see Bill. And Ebby's smart. He goes to visit Bill, but he's not going to go into the story. Bill says, I feared being evangelized. So Ebby just sat there. Bill, how's it going? How's the family? Okay. And he waited for Bill to ask. This is, how to work with others. We can learn a lot from this. So Bill says, Ebby, tell me that neat little formula again that you shared with me. And this is basically what Ebby said. We get honest with ourselves. We get honest with another person. We make restitution for the harms we've done. We pray to God for guidance. And then we try to help other people. So this is the work that Ebby does with Bill in the hospital, and they go through it again. And the big book doesn't have the rest of the story. If you want to read the rest of the story, you go to AA Comes of Age or Bill's biography. So after Ebby leaves, Bill sinks to the lowest point that he's ever been in his life. Deep, dark depression. And this is what happens when you're faced with the choice, right? They talk about it. We had but two means. One was to go on to the bitter end or to pick up the spiritual kit of tools that's laid at our feet. It's decision time, right? So here's Bill, and he sinks to the lowest that he's ever been. And he finds himself in the town's hospital, in that room, crying out, if there's a God, show himself. And Bill says, because he said, I'm ready to do anything at all. And then Bill goes on to say, suddenly the room lit up with a great white light. And it seemed as though there was a wind, not of air, but of spirit. And it blew all around me, and it blew through me. And suddenly I realized I was a free man. So Bill has this powerful, powerful experience. And for the first time in his life, he's at peace. He says, I laid there on the bed for a while, afraid to kind of do anything. And as it begins to subside, the thinking mind comes back. This is our biggest enemy right here, by the way, the thinking mind. So the thinking mind begins to assert itself again and say, wait a minute, that can't be real, you got to be going crazy. So Bill calls Dr. Silkworth. Dr. Silkworth comes in. Bill tells him the story of what's just happened. And here's one of Silkworth's greatest contributions to Alcoholics Anonymous. Silkworth could have said to Bill, well, Bill, I don't know, but that belladonna stuff is pretty strong. And, don't worry about that, it's going to wear off. But instead, Silkworth allows Bill his belief as to what's occurred. He says, Bill, I don't know what's happened, but I'm going to tell you something. You better hang on to it, because you're so much better than you were just 2 hours ago. Ebby comes back the next day, and Bill tells Ebby what's happened. Ebby runs back to the Oxford group and said, Bill's had this great spiritual experience. And they told Ebby, bring Bill 2 books. One was The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James, and the other book was The Little Flowers of St. Francis. And that's how Bill got so hooked up with St. Francis. But Bill reads The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James, and it's a very tough read. But Bill says he read through it in a couple of days. And in there's a couple of stories of recovery from alcoholism. And one of them is the story of this guy, S.H. Hadley. And S.H. Hadley had this huge spiritual experience in a jail cell in Manhattan. And I could only see Bill reading this, and his eyes are lighting up, because he's thinking to himself, I've just had the same experience. And it was after reading The Varieties of Religious Experience that Bill had this vision. And it's really what became a vision for you. Bill was able to see a chain of alcoholics with one carrying the message to another. Bill tried to sober up so many times on his own resolve. Okay? And it was only when Ebby came, so one recovered drunk telling someone who's still into the thick of it that there is a solution. And here's the solution, and you may not like it, but I'm going to tell you, if you do it, it will work. This little practical program of action. So Bill says in his story, and my friend came and visited me at the hospital, and we did this, and we did this. I surrendered my life to God. We made a list of those we had harmed, and I was going to make restitution, and I was going to pray for guidance now. So here's Bill basically having recovered. The obsession's gone, just like that. Just like that. Now, for a lot of us, the lightning does not strike instantly. And this is why in the book they said sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. My own personal experience, the second time I was sobering up in 1989, sitting in a rehab, upstate New York, by the way, a booming voice came into my head telling me to get on my knees. And just like that, I was picked up and turned 180 degrees like you wouldn't believe, because I knew what the voice was. And the voice is inside your head yelling. And it's not telling you to go kill somebody. It's telling you to get on your knees. It's very easy to figure out what that voice is. So sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. And it does happen. People can have these sudden conversion experiences. And, you know, I like the Bible. It says, in the twinkling of an eye. And that's all it was, in the twinkling of an eye. So Bill had this vision of helping other drunks. And what's the surest mark or sign of a spiritual experience? When you can't keep it to yourself. When whatever it is that you've experienced, you have to bring to other people. It becomes the overwhelming and overriding desire in your life to carry the message. And the message is not, look at me, look what's happened. Instead, the message is, look what's happened to me. And if it could happen to me, it could happen to you. The message is never about the messenger. It's never about the messenger. So Bill starts trying to sober up alcoholics. And he's running around trying to scoop them out of the gutter. And he's telling them about this white light experience. And nobody's sobering up. So after a few months, Bill is feeling dejected at all this. And he complains to Lois, Lois, I can't help anybody. But Lois says, but Bill, something's working because you're staying sober. At this point, Bill's sober for 5 months. He's never put together that kind of time. She says, why don't you go see Dr. Silkworth? See if you can get some advice. So Bill goes to see Silkworth and says, why can't I help anyone? And Silkworth says to him, and here's this last piece of this kind of puzzle, he says, Bill, you got the cart before the horse. You keep telling these drunks about spirituality. They're not ready to hear that yet. Why don't you do what I did with you? Okay? Tell them first about the illness. Tell them about the obsession of the mind. Tell them about the allergy and the phenomenon of craving. Okay, drill that home. Once they accept that and their powerlessness, then you could tell them about the solution. And that was the missing piece. And this leads to the fourth founding moment. So here's Bill now. He's trying to make a comeback in business, and he's going to go out to Akron, Ohio. Him and a bunch of guys have put together a proxy fight to take over the National Machinery and Rubber Company out in Akron, Ohio. And if it's a success, Bill is going to become the president of this company. So Bill heads out to Akron, the proxy fight is on, and the whole thing blows up in their faces. And Bill and his associates are soundly defeated in the proxy fight. And most of them leave, and they leave Bill in Akron. Bill's going to try to salvage the situation. He's going to ask for a recount. He's going to try to see what he could do. So there's Bill on a Saturday afternoon in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel in Akron, Ohio. He's probably got but $10 in his pocket, not a friend in the world, feeling low, sad, and depressed. It's late in the afternoon, and he can hear the music coming from the lobby bar, and the laughter, the smell of smoke. And Bill says to himself, you know, I think I'm going to go in there and I'm going to scrape up an acquaintance. Maybe I'll have a glass of ginger ale. As he begins to walk in, the mind says, well, maybe you can have one drink. And here's what the mind does to us, right? Tells you the lie. You can have one drink. But Bill knew he was in trouble. And he spotted a directory of churches on the wall. And he went and got change for $1, a bunch of nickels, and he starts making phone calls. Synchronicity. Picks up the phone and he gets Walter Tunks, the Reverend Walter Tunks from St. Paul's Church in Akron. And Walter Tunks is involved with the Oxford Group. Bill's a member of the Oxford Group in New York. Tunks gives him a bunch of names to call. Bill makes the calls, finally gets this guy on the phone, Norman Shepard. Norman says, I'm leaving for New York, but I want you to call this woman, Henrietta Seiberling. Bill recognizes the name. The Seiberlings are the owners of Goodyear Tire. And Bill knows he has met Frank Seiberling and his wife. Bill doesn't want to call. Say, I need help, I need a drunk to talk to. So Big Book talks about willing to go to any length. Because there's that drink still calling Bill. And in an ultimate act of humility, Bill picks up the phone and makes that call. Fortunately, Henrietta is not the wife of Frank Seiberling, but the daughter-in-law. She hears Bill's story. Bill says, I'm a rum hound from New York, and I'm a member of the Oxford Group, and I need another drunk to talk to. Well, Henrietta's been trying to help sober up this drunk called Dr. Bob Smith. Synchronicity. Bob's in Akron, very bad drunk, proctologist. Member of the Oxford Group for 2.5 years. Okay, he's been in the Oxford Group since 1933. And just 2 or 3 weeks before, Henrietta had held a special meeting of the Oxford Group for Dr. Bob. And she kind of set it up on the side without Bob knowing it. She told everybody, come over and be ready to do some really deep sharing because we're going to try to draw Bob out. And they had this meeting and the sharing took place. And when it came Dr. Bob's turn to speak, he says, well, all you good people have shared something very deep about yourselves. Now I'm going to tell you about me. He says, I'm a secret drinker and I can't stop. And the group says, do you want us to pray for you, Bob? Bob says, yes. So they all get down on their knees and pray for Bob. Just 2 weeks later, Bill Wilson shows up in Akron, Ohio, calls Henrietta Seiberling and says, I'm a rum hound from New York. She says, you come right over here. She knew that that was the answer for Dr. Bob. They end up hooking up. So it's the day before Mother's Day, the story in the Big Book, and Dr. Bob has come home drunk and he's gone to bed. So the next day, Ann Smith gets on Bob and says, come on, we're going over to Henrietta's. And Bob says, well, I'll give that guy 15 minutes. And they get over to the gatehouse. It's about 5 o'clock, and there's Bill Wilson. Bob's got the shakes in the worst way. And Bill breaks the ice by saying, Bob, you look like you could use a drink. Right? We don't start preaching right away. You look like you could use a drink. So they go into the library, and what was going to be a 15-minute talk went more than 5 hours. And when Bob came out of that library, he said, this is the first guy who's ever known anything when it comes to talking about alcoholism. And what was it that Bill brought to Bob that day? So Bob's in the Oxford Group. He knows the spiritual solution. Bob didn't know the problem. Bob's a doctor, and he never heard anyone talk about the allergy of the body and the obsession of the mind. But when Bob heard it, he said, that's exactly how I drink. When I start, I can't stop. And when I'm not drinking, I'm thinking about drinking. Bob said this was the first guy who ever knew anything. He had a couple more talks with Bill. Bob sobered up shortly afterwards. Bob comes to New Jersey for the American Medical Association convention and has the relapse of all relapses. But when he gets back to Akron, and Bill's, by the way, he's moved in with Bob and Ann Smith. So they spend 3 days sobering Bob up. Bob's got to do surgery that Monday morning. And that last night, Bob looks at Bill and says, I'm going to go through with this thing. So the next day, Bob goes to do the surgery and then doesn't come home, and they figure Bob has relapsed. But what Bob did after the surgery, and they like to say he went and made his amends. Not really. Bob had nothing to give anybody to make amends. But what Bob did was go up and down the street and face everybody and say, I'm an alcoholic. Bob's biggest fear all along was people were going to find out that he was a drinker. Everyone knew he was a drinker. Bob was the only one who didn't know what everybody else knew. But you see, that was Bob's surrender. Bob went around and told everybody. And once the cat's out of the bag, then there's nothing to hide anymore, right? You hear this expression all the time. You're only as sick as your secrets. So in these 4 founding moments, what's the common theme? What's the book trying to tell us all along? Step 12 says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message. I'm going to tell you, in Alcoholics Anonymous today, there's a lot of messages being carried. What is this message? So I would opine, if you would allow me, that this message is right there. So if it says that on pages 58, 59, and 60 in the big book, the message is somewhere between page 1 and page 60. Where it says, where the 12th step is first written. And in the founding moments, here's what I see as the message. So the little ABCs of alcoholism, and I think memory serves me right, it's on page 60. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. And see that God could and would if he was sought. We go back to Roland Hazard and Carl Jung. What does Carl Jung tell Roland? No human power is going to relieve your alcoholism. You need to place yourself in the religious atmosphere of your choosing and hope that the lightning will strike. And then see, God could and would if he was sought. What did Ebby tell Bill? Okay, no human power is going to relieve your alcoholism. But God could and would. The God of your own understanding could and would if he was sought. And what did Bill bring to Bob? That you're alcoholic and can't manage your own life. Bob knew probably the other 2 pieces. But you can't put a solution into play until you understand the problem. You at least have to know the problem and accept. So this is why the first step is so critical. Powerless over alcohol. If you're an alcoholic, you're never going to drink successfully. Done deal. Well, then how do I work on this little thing that keeps telling me you're going to drink successfully? God could and would if he was sought. Thanks for letting me share.
Epic job. Thanks, John. On behalf of the whole Conscious Contact group, I'd like to thank you one more time for coming. If you have any questions, please form a line and thank John at the end. Bob. And if you have any questions, he'd be happy to answer them. He has his own set up here, and he can go through and show you some of the stuff. Next week we have Chris D., Fellowship of the Spirit from Rockaway Beach, New York. New York guys are always epic. What else did I want to say? Oh, we have a Facebook page, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group. It keeps you informed of all the things. You can see all the flyers and speakers. We have a website. Just Google AA Saturday night, Doylestown meeting. What else? January 28th, she did that. Oh, I have 600 CDs. They're free. If you need some CDs, come get them afterwards and spend some time with us. And we got a nice way of closing, and thanks for coming out. And spend some time with us. And we got a nice way of closing, and thanks for coming out.